At that time, Dublin was a much smaller city, and the journalists knew me and I knew them, so instead of saying Barney McKenna, Ronnie Drew, Luke Kelly and Kieran Burke, they just called it the Ronnie Drew Group.
As down the glen came a Calpine's men, with their shovels slung behind them.
One day we did a rehearsal, which was a very, very strange thing for the Dubliners to have done, because we used to rehearse it when we'd be singing and all that. And somebody said, well, the Ronnie Drew Group's kind of this, and we should call it something else and all that. So Luke happened to be reading a copy of James Joyce's Dubliners. So he said, why not call it the Dubliners? And that was it.
The Dubliners, Ireland's first urban folk group, were now central to the Irish folk scene. They signed with Transatlantic Records and began recording, touring and playing regularly in the Embankment, the Abbey Tavern and O'Donoghue's pub. It was in O'Donoghue's that Luke met and started a relationship with the American singer and actress Deirdre O'Connell. The Dubliners signed up with Major Minor and began recording and touring more intensively.
My heart lies smothered in my breast. It's not
Deirdre and Luke were married in Dublin. In 1967, the Dubliners' first single was banned, causing a major controversy that would help to make them stars.
I was living in England myself when 7 Drunken Nights was a hit. And that just changed everything.
Oh, as I went home on Monday night, as drunk could be, I saw a horse outside the door, where my old horse should be. Well, I called me wife and I said to her, will you kindly tell to me, who owns that horse outside the door, where my old horse should be? Ah, you're drunk, you silly old fool, still you cannot see. That's a lovely sow that me mother sent to me.
I think that everyone was delighted when the Dubliners broke through, because they achieved something that we had been trying to do and never managed. They actually popularised folk music.
And as I went home on Tuesday night, as drunk could be,
I seem to remember not liking anything that was called folk, especially Irish folk music. I thought it was crap, and so did everyone on our street, because we came from suburban Ballymun, Nowheresville. It was like outer space. There was no sense of culture at all that I remember. People who laid it on thick were to be avoided. They were the enemy when I was a kid. Then there was the Dubliners, and just a complete exception to that. They were more like the Rolling Stones or the Clash.
but buttons in a blanket shawl I never saw before.
I think Ronnie first heard about it from some show band that was over in London at the time. They said, you're in the charts this week. And Ronnie's reaction, I remember, was, he said, is that good or bad? And he wasn't trying to be funny.
None of us were under any delusions that we were now stars. We were just going to get more readies for gigs and make more money for porter.
They represented by their very difference. They were anarchic, they had beards, which they sang rude songs, they didn't dress alike, they didn't behave nicely. Markedly different from the Clancy brothers, although they were close friends, I think, and markedly different from anything that had gone before.
Luke got a terrific buzz out of that, I'd say, you know, because he loved Mick Jagger and Paul McCartney and the Beatles. He was in his element there, you know, for a short while.
And now, live from New York, Ed Sullivan.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. What could be more appropriate than for Sullivan from County Cork to open our St. Patrick's Day show with 5 bearded Irishmen from Dublin: Ronnie Drew, Kieran Burke, Luke Kelly, Barney McKenna, and John Sheehan. So let's have a fine opening welcome for my Irishmen.
The way the music was done and the way the songs were sung, it suggested a lifestyle we embraced, you know, kind of madness, plenty of crack, plenty of porter and plenty of singing and plenty of women, all that kind of thing. It was great.
In the days I went to sport, and I was never tired of sporting, to an alehouse or Jenny's the house besides. I told me brother Seamus I'd go off and be right famous, and I never would return again till I roamed the world wide. Goodbye, Martin Durbin, sure I'm sick and tired of working. No more I'll lick the praties and no longer.
Every time you do a gig, the natural thing was to go drink and live it up, and because we could all manage to perform the next day. Don't ask me how, but we seem to be able to, because you'd be going into places and meeting people like Keith Moon. He'd be in the club one night. We went into a place and he'd play the drums in the lobby and have a drink, and a drink was a bottle of champagne each, like bottles of stout. We were all going over drinking these bottles of champagne. I remember going into a place called the Speakeasy Club in London with Luke, and we met Jimi Hendrix and Paul McCartney, and it was like backstage at some pantomime or something, the way everybody was dressed up.
Luke's political conscience was keener than ever. He used the Dubliners' international success to bring public attention to the struggle of the dispossessed.
There was a very strong commitment growing from about the need for justice, a protest against all forms of injustice. The anti-apartheid movement, Mandela being imprisoned, the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement across America.
I think Luke Kelly and the Dubliners were a fusion of the struggles of the blacks in America and indeed the liberal civil rights supporters. And he linked the struggles of the civil rights movement in America and the struggles for the civil rights marchers in Northern Ireland.
Well, I think that there's no doubt at all that in 1968 and indeed the 1960s, that the civil rights movement in the United States, in particular in the leadership and impact of Martin Luther King, had an enormous influence right across the world. And it certainly had a very big influence here in Northern Ireland.
But I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
We were looking in the civil rights movement for equality of treatment for both sections of our people. And when it was boiled down, we were talking in terms of one person, one vote. And we were talking in terms of the fair allocation of public housing and fair allocation of employment.
Catholics here are faced with blatant social injustice, and this forces moderate people into immoderate actions.
In Alabama in 1958, the cost of human life is very low. A man that's black is trampled down just like them.
Luke was very much in tune with the struggle of people in Northern Ireland to have a voice, to be heard. But I wouldn't describe him as a nationalist. He was more of an internationalist.
Now every man may walk his road in peace, for